Okay, I think it's time we begin. If you'll get settled, anybody who's coming in, please do. This is the alleged Delta-8 Showdown Dueling panel. I'll give it about one more minute. Actually, it's 2:15 now. Let's begin. Hello, you all. Thanks for coming. My name is Bruce Kennedy. I'm the moderator for this. We'll go through the panels. Let me just give a little explanation. You okay, Celeste? Okay. Can you all hear me? How's that? Is that better? Thank you. Okay, my name is Bruce Kennedy. I'm based here in Denver. I've been covering the cannabis industry as a journalist since 2010, writing for cannabis-centric outlets like Leafly, Dope Magazine, and the Delta and the Denver Post Cannabis website, but I've also written for more mainstream groups, including Politico, CBS, The Guardian, MSN, AOL, if you go back that far. Along with my freelance reporting work, I'm a senior reporter and associate editor at Hemp Benchmarks, which is an independent price reporting agency based here in Colorado and New York. We look at the domestic and international hemp sector. And regarding Delta-8, I consider myself agnostic. I have covered it for nearly a year, but I've never tried it, and I'm not sure either way, whether it's a benefit or otherwise for the industry. And let's go through the panel. And talking with all these folks earlier today, they can kind of argue both sides of the issue, but they have been kind enough to divide up into a pro and anti. That being said, there's a lot of gray in this, as I'm sure people will agree. On the pro side, sounds like professional wrestling, right? Can you raise your hand when I call you? Luna Sower, Vice President of Business Development at California-based iSpire, and along with the development and production of vapes, she has a 15-year history working in cannabis education, training, and promotional activities. Is that correct? Cool. Russell Lombard, thank you. CEO of Canna Redux and Forge Hemp Company here in Denver. Canna Redux is a B2B wholesaler of cannabinoids, including Delta-8 THC, CBD, CBG, CBN, CBC, and a couple of other alphabet soups. Forge Hemp Company is a B2C specializing in high-potency CBD topicals and tinctures. He also consulted with the hemp industry before the 2018 Farm Bill, which legalized hemp nationally. Todd Underwood, if you please, President of Evolution CBD. He is also the former COO and franchise holder of CBD American Shaman, which is one of the first CBD companies in the U.S. Harry Resin, Chief Cannabis Officer at Assentient. Am I saying that right? Yep. Cool. Assentient Labs in Oakland. He's also Chief Brand Officer at Gold Drop and President of the publicly traded Canadian company PharmaDrug. He's been in the industry for almost 25 years. Started off in Amsterdam as a cannabis breeder and grower, and is a contributor to High Times, which is near to my heart, for many years, and has written for most of the cannabis magazines on the planet, as he likes to say. On the anti-side, such as it is, Jessica Arendt, Chief Compliance Officer at Cannabinoid Life and Human Resources Director at Blumios Labs, both based in Florida. Cannabinoid Life sells a variety of CBD products and also created what it calls the world's first all-in-one CBD education website. She specializes in safety compliance issues from seed to sale. She's been in the industry since 2016. Ricky Chandler, AKA Ricochet. Ricochet? That's right, from Indiana. Owner of Willie's CBD Works in Crown Point near the border with Illinois. He introduced CBD products into the state in 2017 ahead of the Farm Bill. He shattered his pelvic bone when he was 20 and has used CBD to help him get rid of 15 years of opioids use. His business was recently voted by local media as best CBD shop in the region. Joe Wicker. Okay, thank you. He is with Botanic Wellness, which is based in Arizona, but is international. They have offices, is that correct, in New South Wales and Australia. And they do both hemp farming for flour, grain, and fiber. Is that right? Okay, thank you. And Carl Craig. Okay, Dr. Craig he's a PhD in chemistry. He's also CEO of Botanicor Labs here in Denver. Thank you all. Give him a round of applause before we start, all right? Thank you. All right. I'm hoping this will be, we only have so much time and a lot of ground to cover. So this is going to kind of be like this. Hopefully you know a bit about Delta-8 to begin with, but we'll try and touch on that. And we'll open up the last 10 to 15 minutes of this for questions. Let's start first with, what is Delta-8? Why is it popular? Dr. Craig, we were talking about this earlier. Can you kind of give a layman's version of how Delta-8 works, please?
Okay, I'm going to apologize right off that this is a little bit geeky, but you got to bear with me. Everybody knows CBD, right? And the structure of it. You've seen it up here plenty of times. Delta-8 is a constitutional isomer of CBD, meaning it has the same molecular weight, but it's not the same structure. The structure is different because CBD has an open ring. When you take CBD as an open ring and you treat it chemically, you can close that ring and make Delta-8 THC.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that? Does that sound correct to the panel? All right.
I think, the way I first understood it, and I'm from Indiana where we have a lot more regulation and less stuff is legal, but the way we see it, it's kind of like saying that Delta-8 kind of gives you the psychoactive effects that Delta-9 does, just not as strong. So at least where I'm from, that's what's making it really popular, is it seems you can get the recreational benefits from Delta-8 that you cannot from CBD. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Show of hands. You don't have to if you don't want to. Who here has tried Delta-8? All right. Would you agree with that assessment? Harry, tell us about it.
I'd like to add one thing that there was a company called Guild that about 4 or 5 years ago was one of the first to actually put out a Delta-8 product. It was not coming from CBD. It was through distillation of Delta-9 THC. Back then, I thought it was very unique, very interesting product, definitely got you high, and is one of the few cannabinoids that the US government has a patent on.
Anybody else want to discuss the differences between Delta-8 as an intoxicant versus Delta-9?
I call it high school stoned for folks like me who have been consuming since I was literally 11 years old. I can't get high the same way off of Delta-9. Delta-8 hits a different receptor, and it actually gets a psychoactivity for someone who has a lot of endocannabinoid saturation on the other side. So for me, I really like it because it hits a spot that most other cannabinoids really can't for me.
Thank you. Let's talk about the legal
I'd like
aspect.
to just add one more thing too.
Yes,
for a lot of people that, especially with the person that created it from Guild, Brad, he got a lot of anxiety from the high potency Delta-9 that was around in California. And I know a lot of people that suffer from the same issue. And when you take different ratio-based vape cartridges, as an example, with CBD, with a little bit of HTE, and with a little bit of Delta-8, HTE is high terpene extract, for those of you that don't know, you also get a very unique high that doesn't, in fact, typically have the paranoia or some of the issues that people have reported smoking pure Delta-9.
Is that a generalized? I mean, that's for you, obviously, but is that what you're hearing from other people as well?
That's not, yes, from
Okay.
other people as well. Yeah.
Right. Let's shift over to sort of a legal aspect of this. As I'm sure you're well aware, the laws on Delta-8 have been evolving constantly. I just went online this morning and there were 4 additional articles with conflicting information about it. More than a dozen states have so far banned Delta-8. And another 10 states, from last I looked, are now working out some sort of regulatory or compliance frameworks for it. Meanwhile, you have advocacy groups like the U.S. Hemp Authority. Their president, Marielle Weintraub, recently said that Delta-8 defies the intentions of the hemp laws, the final rule, if you're familiar with that. She also said that promotion of Delta-8 is short-sighted, and she is worried that, in her words, it could bring down the hemp industry. Russell, if I can call on you, do you feel that those concerns are valid?
So just to address the legal side of it, the main conflicts, as far as the gray area, if you will, have 2 main points. One is Delta-8 is included on the CSA, the Controlled Substance Act. The other is how it's accounted for in the Analog Act. The problem is, where the gray area comes up, is that the hemp bill carved out hemp and all cannabinoids except Delta-9 as no longer involved with, no longer illegal, no longer Schedule 1. So from a legal standpoint, it's still gray, and that's a bulk of the argument. The other part of it being synthetic is a dangerous argument for the hemp industry to make, because so many cannabinoids including CBD, CBN, CBC, are or could be considered synthetically manufactured. They are conversions, but they are not necessarily psychotropic, so they don't get as much attention. So I think that gets the gray area.
All right. Jessica, you deal with compliance and safety issues. What are your thoughts on this?
I come at this from a very different perspective. Delta-8, in order to achieve Delta-8, requires solvents. The average user of those vape products, and I'll be specific to the cartridges, being sold to every smoke shop, convenience store around the country, regardless of its schedule. The brain doesn't fully develop until you're 27 years old, and the solvents bore holes in the brain, and they're smoking it. The vape industry saw all kinds of issues last year, so much so that they faced being shut down, part and parcel to that because of crystallization in the lungs. The solvents alone pose an issue and a problem. And then you add to that the toxicity levels, and not understanding at what point does a child or a young adult, or even a senior for that matter, register that potency? And how does their endocannabinoid system process that? The question becomes a moral question, and it is a federally scheduled cannabinoid.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
So, those are all primarily regulatory issues.
A little louder, please.
So those all sound primarily like regulatory issues, because solvents and reactants are used in the production of CBD isolate, CBG isolate, CBN, CBC, and extraction itself. There is no standardization or requirements, unfortunately, in the industry in place right now, requiring testing for consumer products on those. I do agree that they should be, but they're not.
From my position, and I agree with you, absolutely. We use solvents, we use cold pressure, we use CO2. This industry and the hemp side of the industry is based on plant medicine and wellness. It is based on the well-being and quantifiable quality of life. That was our mission. Now we're seeking new avenues for greed for gain. I don't get on board with that. If you want to play in D8, take it to the cannabis side. Get it regulated. Do it the right way. But to bring it into the hemp side of things under health and wellness and plant wellness, to me is absurd. It's an oxymoron.
I agree with her there. You know, like, I have a little different perspective than them because in Indiana, Delta-9 is illegal. Delta-8 is soon to be banned there as well. And while from a business owner standpoint, I agree, you know, like, wow, if we can make money off this compound and do good at the same time, that sounds good. But if we're sacrificing the quality of the product, the quality of the life for the people that are taking the product, then it really isn't worth it. And there does need to be regulations around it to protect that and keep people that are just looking for the recreational high from going out there and mixing these solvents in their basement or in their bathtub and try to be chemical cowboys and do more harm than good. That's not what this industry is about. So I have to agree with her there.
Okay,
So
I would like to touch on a couple of things you said.
Let me jump in a second, okay? Good points all across. What should be done? And I bring this up because you can either look at this as a state's issue, as is being currently handled, or as a federal issue. One of the chief justices said that, you know, the states are the laboratories of democracy, and they appear to be the ones who are going ahead with regulation. Should this be prodding the federal government into looking at something with Delta-8 besides just the crackdowns we've been hearing about? Any thoughts? Go ahead.
Yes. So one point to that point of all these solvents and all these things, I mean, you're so worried about children smoking solvents, yet we have tobacco. They're smoking that. They're drinking cola, which is also rotting their brains. Now, the reality is,
A little louder, please.
if we're going to have a federal agency come in and moderate this, they should start with the biomass, because the reality is cannabis is one of the largest taproots out of any plants on human earth, and it is sucking in every chemical compound that is being used for the last 50 years in commercial agriculture in all of the places that are now growing hemp. So if we're so worried about the children, shouldn't we be testing all of the biomass before it goes into any single product, including smokable CBD? Because at the end of the day, if you look at California and the cannabis industry there, we're so tightly regulated and we're so tightly lab controlled that the heavy metals that have been used for years in the grape industry and in other industries in Santa Barbara, cadmium and such, are now coming up in cannabis. So I think it's a national issue. If we're so worried about poisoning children, then we should really start with the very basic fabric of what we're working with,
Harry,
which is biomass.
let me jump in. Sorry. Would you agree though that a lot of companies are taking advantage? I won't say exploiting, but a lot of companies are taking advantage of the legal loophole that's happening right now, and basically running with this until they hear otherwise.
I'd say, guess what? If it wasn't for the legal or illegal loopholes, people like me that started this industry when it was illegal, where most of the people that are in this room wouldn't have done it because I was just a drug dealer. Well, guess what? Loopholes what led to the expansion and the change of consciousness for people to accept this as a plant-based medicine, which it should have been from the very beginning. So,
No, I mean, agreed that, and it's the same thing with CBD. There wouldn't be the developments with this until there was some prodding. I'm sorry, you.
No, I want to touch on a couple things real quick. I don't like the morality argument because that's too subjective, because what's moral to you may not be moral to me. As a grown adult, I choose my own morality, and if I choose to do something, that should be between me and whoever else is involved. I don't think bringing in any government bureaucracy is going to help this industry at all. For example, here in Colorado, recreational marijuana is legal, but they arbitrarily made Delta-8 illegal. Why? To protect their tax revenue. It's all about the dollars and cents when you start bringing in government bureaucracy. That's number one. Number two, if you talk about all the solvents used in vaping, vaping is just one minute form of the delivery method of Delta-8. There's edibles, there's water solubles, there's a lot better ways to ingest the product than vaping. So that's just one argument. If you're worried about solvents, let's go down the path of a water soluble or a nano product where you can take a very small amount of it and get the bioavailability. Now, from a personal standpoint, I was against Delta-8 until I tried it. Once you try Delta-8, you're going to realize that it's talked up a whole lot more than what it really is. The problem that you're going to see is the way companies are marketing this product. They're marketing it as a legal marijuana, and that comes down to professional accountability, not regulatory issues. When you market the product, we see every day people coming out with 250 milligram gummies of Delta-8, and that's just absolutely absurd. The only thing you're going to do is get the product into somebody's hands that they don't know anything about it, and they're going to end up in the ER because they're freaked out over what just happened to them. So it's a lot of issues that are convoluted into a bigger issue that, do we need government oversight in it? I don't know if that's the best way to solve this problem. Just because somebody may not find it medicinally beneficial, I think it does a phenomenal job of winding me down at the end of the day, making me relax and allowing me to enjoy some rest. That's my own personal experience, and that was changed after I tried it a couple times.
I have a broader question, but Joe, you can give us an international perspective on this. Is Delta-8 being considered outside of the United States? Are you hearing about it in Australia, for example?
So the answer is
Louder.
yes. And because Delta-8 by itself does have a medicinal aspect to it that works. It's less anxiety than a Delta-9 product. And so there are people who take Delta-9. But what we're doing in Australia is doing it through the medical access scheme, which is dramatically different than promoting a THC-based drug through a gas station. Well, basically using a loophole to take it from a licensed environment where people know what they're getting. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that this faces is somebody's going to buy it. They're not going to know what they're getting, what they're buying. And while we're all very familiar with the differences, even to have a discussion between Delta-8 and Delta-9 is outside of this environment, people don't know what you're talking about. People don't know the difference between marijuana and hemp. let alone THC, Delta-9 and Delta-8. And so whenever people have a reaction that they're not expecting, they're going to panic, and they're going to call the EMTs. They're going to get medical attention when they probably don't need it, other than the reaction that they're having is unexpected. And that's happened already in Florida and Georgia. And then what happens is now we have put the consumer at risk. We're causing harm to the consumers in the eyes of the regulatory agencies, and that's going to harm the industry as a whole. There's been a lot of strides made in making marijuana legal and for medicinal purposes, and those are going to get walked back whenever there is considered that there's a harm to the community that's now being evidenced by somebody calling. They have to call the EMTs because they don't know what's happening to them.
I wrote about that. It was Leafly, overconsumption of cannabis in general. It's a big issue in a lot of hospitals here, mostly tourists though. So if you're from out of town, be careful.
Another
And
thing
Bruce,
I
if I could
just
just
real
quick to walk back on one of the comments that was made earlier.
Go ahead.
Biomass is tested for harmful chemicals, and all of our products are made through CMG and ISO 9000 processes to ensure its quality. I mean, that's the responsibility we have here inside of this industry, is to make responsible products that the consumer can rely on, and that's how we're going to build an industry. And as a farming, from the farming aspect, we've been down this road already. We've already gone back and said, hey, you said in the 2018 Farm Bill, Delta-9, 0.3. Other than that, it's hemp. Well, guess what? That ship's already sailed. They said, no, we meant all THC. And that's exactly the direction this is going to end up.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, so I apologize for being redundant.
Yeah.
But isn't that what this gray area is exploiting? I mean, you're having people who are using biomass or distillate that has not necessarily been properly checked, and that can lead to potential issues with contamination. Is that a fair thing to state?
It is, and what I'm saying now is we already know how this movie ends. Is that it's going to get regulated, and it's going to be pushed back over to the marijuana side, and in the meantime, it could stunt some of the progress that's made inside of this industry.
Or I've just been told that we can extend this, so either you all are interested or somebody's canceled. So we'll talk a bit longer and slower. Okay, I'm sorry, you were Zarnit.
So I don't think that we concluded. The question was, when Marjorie made the statement about it would take over this industry, I believe what she was trying to say was, at the point in time that you trip over into the psychotropic and you are no longer mindful of the wellness of the hemp side of the plant and the cannabinoids, you put us at risk, because now it becomes a matter of intoxication over wellness.
And I just want to speak to, can you guys hear me?
louder.
Okay. I just want to speak to the term exploitative, right? This is like a kind of a theoretical existential question around capitalism and commodifying a healing plant. So there's like a zoom out, first of all, a lot of us are coming from a lot of trauma. A lot of us are coming from a scarcity mindset. We've been in this industry for almost a decade. We've had a lot of losses, and there's a lot of desperation. So from the pro side, it makes sense that people are exploiting this because there's the people that are bad actors that are trying to make a quick buck. And this is my 9th or 10th trade show in the past couple of months, and people are dropping like flies at these Delta-8 conferences because they're taking gummies and drinking things that are not regulated. But then when you work with the good companies that actually have the ISO certifications and all of these COAs and things, so really it comes back to like integrity, like we keep talking about. What do you do when no one's watching? Like for us at Jetty Extracts, when we were doing this before anyone else was back in 2013, we were testing, we were paying taxes, we were being good actors when no one was asking us to get ahead of it, to not only be a model for other companies to follow suit and raise the tide of the whole industry, but also because we wanted to get ahead. We had in-house counsel letting us know, we had our morals guiding us. So there's a kind of a question around, like we keep talking about, when there's profit on the table or wellness, the nature of capitalism is exploitative. And so you've got this mentality of a bunch of people feeding on on a small market, so to speak, and trying to do this turn and burn, materialistic, consumeristic mindset that this is just a consumer packaged goods. And so it is throwing a lot of the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that what this pro side is pro good operators. Like, don't use the language of the oppressor and the prohibitionist, like we keep talking about. Don't think about it as prohibition. Think about it as how can we use this and do it in the right way.
Let me push back, and I am having a little trouble hearing you. I mean, we had the situation with the vape pens issue, about a year ago? And that was due to some contaminants that were being put into that. There are always going to be some bad actors. You can find them in any field. What can be done? What should be done, do you think, to separate from that? Should there be some sort of warnings going out, not just from the municipal and federal authorities, but from the industry itself?
I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think we need consumer education. We need it across all of the trade organizations, and lobbyists need to really get on the same page around messaging. And it really is on the brands to be good marketers. And there should be, like there's, if you guys are on Instagram, there's Blacklist XYZ and Dank Busters, and they're using LinkedIn now to basically call out bad actors and hold each other accountable. Because as we know, this is a very small space. And if you have a bad reputation, that goes really far. So I think there, there's a consumer education piece around, doing pop-ups in the stores, asking people for COAs. Someone was mentioning, I brought back a Delta-8, Delta-10 product from one of the vendors here back to the round table when we were in the green room. And they were like, did you look at the COAs for this and that? They use bleaching clays on some of that, and they're not testing for certain bleaching agents. So we don't know if people are passing out from the Delta-8 because they have low blood sugar and they're dehydrated and have alcohol in their system, or maybe they're just lightweights and they thought a 25 milligram dose of Delta-8 was the same as their normal 25 milligram dose of Delta-9, or if it's the solvents and the things that Jess is talking about. So I think that really it's like to ask like Uncle Sam and all of these people to get in our business, I think is important, but no more important than making sure that our agriculture is not using pesticides. I mean, we have, what's the pesticide that stays for 30, 40 years? It starts with an M that all of our farms in NorCal picked up. It was the mycobutanol, right? You buy a farm that's been organic for 30 years, but 2 years before that, they used mycobutanol. It's a bioaccumulator, like he's saying. It'll suck up all the heavy metals and things like that. So I think that we need to work on lobbying. Everyone needs to have in their business plan 1% goes to lobbying organizations or lobbying efforts, getting involved. I mean, waiting for people to regulate this for us is not going to do it. We have all the information in the room. I know a lot of friends of mine that are consultants for city councils, for legislators that really don't know, and they're out there and they really want to know this information. Writing letters, getting part of petitions. I really think that it needs to come from us personally.
Todd, you've been a veteran of this industry and have seen it from its inception. What do you think is the next step with Delta-8?
What do I think of the next steps of Delta-8? I'm fairly confident the DEA is going to put a kill to it in the next few months, so I don't think the next steps are going to be very long-lived.
When you say a kill, can you elaborate on that? Mike's up.
Well, due to a poorly written hemp bill, for lack of better words, Delta-8 is currently legal. Now, is the federal government going to pass legislation to decriminalize or declassify or deregulate a mind-altering substance and allow it to the mass market? No. I think the hemp bill slipped something through. People saw that, and now, boom, we have now a multi-million, maybe $1 billion market on Delta-8. The DEA is going to work with Congress in some way, shape, or form to kill it. So I think we have between now and probably October, maybe November, to make a run at this, and then we're going to have to find the next cannabinoid.
And then what happens? Will it be pulled off the market, do you think?
I think Delta-8 will be pulled off of the market after the DEA does whatever they're going to do with it. I think this is a short-lived substance.
Getting raided right now too. Like
Okay,
there's actual raids going on right now around Delta-8. So it's not it's in the very present future.
That side of the room. Yeah, Craig.
So I want to talk about a couple of things. I don't know if you guys understand, but right now, hemp has only got to be tested for one thing, THC. To make it a legal hemp product, you don't have to know if there are heavy metals, pesticides, residual solvents in your products, none of that, until the regulations take effect. That's going to happen, and it'll happen fairly quickly. But now we're backing this up to Delta-8, which isn't even on anybody's radar, and there's no requirement to test anything. I'm going to give another example, and it's moonshine. Right? I like alcohol, man. Gin martini is awesome. But if you're making moonshine in a bathtub, you don't know what you're doing, you're going to kill people. So I'm all for, I'm on the wrong side of the table. I'm okay with Delta-8, but for the fact that it's not being tested, people aren't testing it appropriately, don't know what's in it, they're putting people at risk unduly. I see it all the time in our laboratories. That's one. Two, here's my other anti, and then I'm going to stop, is we have a marijuana lab and a hemp lab. The marijuana folks go through an awful lot to have their products tested, seed to sale, tracking, no diversion. In my lab, I have to track every single milligram of a marijuana product all the way through to destruction. And then we got people creating pounds and pounds of this psychotropic thing and going, I'm going to sell it against those marijuana labs because I don't need to do any of that. It doesn't cost me anything. I can do this cheap. So I think the product needs to, what I would answer is, I think it needs to move into the regulated side, be sold that way, managed that way, and then it'll be fine.
Let me ask the panel in show of hands, please. Who believes Delta-8 should be classified as a Schedule 1 drug? Show of hands. Nobody. Okay.
It already is. The reality is there's an analog drug rule that came out in the 90s to stop MDMA from becoming MDM and all these other analogs. It's an analog. It's already a Schedule 1. Like, that's the reality.
Okay.
The Farm Bill.
So, go ahead.
The Farm Bill just made it so that it was not counted.
Louder.
When it's derived from hemp. I completely agree that Delta-8, when derived from marijuana, is a Schedule 1 drug. When it's derived from hemp, legally speaking, it's not.
Okay. Let me switch the subject a bit, a little lighter. Is Delta-8 the flavor of the month right now? Is it just that it's been getting a lot of media attention, that it's been creating a buzz that people are seeing on social media, or does it have any sort of legs? Who'd like to answer that? Does Delta-8 have legs as a cannabinoid? Do you think it'll be an ongoing product, or is it just the flash in the pan that we're seeing now?
I absolutely think it can have a lot of longevity simply because it has medicinal benefits, and that's a fact.
And what are the
Pain
medicinal
management,
benefits?
pain management, anxiety. Those are two things right there that I know for a fact from personal experience and thousands of testimonies that Delta-8 helps with those issues.
Right. Anyone else?
I would agree with that, but ultimately the people that are going out to the gas stations, they're trying to get high. The reality is, why do people want to do drugs and want to escape and want to get high? I mean, that's not going to stop whether you regulate it or don't regulate it. People are still making meth in trailers. I mean, that's not regulated. The reality is people want to get high, and people found that.
But Harry, let me push back against that. I mean, you know, we had 2 years ago people, gas stations selling CBD as the big thing. We're now seeing Delta-8. Is it going to be surpassed by CBG or CBN or something?
People thought they could get high, and I know people that do get high that find it psychotropic, CBD. So the reality is it's the same thing. You're talking about wellness. Wellness to me comes from a practitioner. It comes from a doctor. It comes from somebody that understands wellness and talks to you as a patient. Going to buy wellness in a gas station, what wellness do we buy in a gas station? I mean, that's the reality. We buy Advil? I mean, what else are you buying that's wellness-based out of a gas station or a 7-Eleven or a bodega? You're buying something to get you high, like alcohol or hooch or whatever. I mean, that's my opinion.
All right, Jessica? I'm sorry.
I think the question is a bit convoluted. The cannabinoids, whether they're isolated or the entourage, every single one of them has a medicinal value. That is not in question. Is Delta-8 psychotropic? Absolutely. Does it have value in the body, in the endocannabinoid system? Absolutely. It does. The question is, does it belong on the hemp side or does it belong on the cannabis side? And should it be regulated? And the truth is, we're barreling up to a new farm bill, happens every 4 years. The states are clarifying one by one. Louisiana just a few days ago called 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11. They're calling it a combination of all of the molecules that fall under the Delta classification because they are psychotropic. And therein lies the delineation, I believe. I don't want this audience to feel that the pro side or the against side has an issue with the molecule itself. We embrace every single one of them. The question is, who should it be available to and under what circumstances?
Joe, you had something you wanted to add?
Well, yeah, it's the idea that if this industry stays to where it's just trying to sell people to get high, we already about 76% of all this product is sold to people who are already familiar with cannabis. The entire market as a whole has barely even begun to get into this, and the majority of that market doesn't want to get high. That's why they're not involved here. They want medicinal effects, and if like Delta-8 has the possibility to be a better pain relief option to add to CBD to help people with that without giving them anxiety. They might have better effects from that. But if we're focusing on selling to people to get high, we're never going to get there. We're never going to get over that stigma, and we're not going to get the crossover, which is ultimately what this business needs. It needs a crossover to the mainstream consumer.
Well, as you said, I mean, it's in the infancy stages right now. There's so little research that's going on, even in places like Israel, regarding this. So we really are present at the creation in a lot of ways. I want to get back to the Controlled Substances Act. No one here raised their hands. So you believe that this should not be considered, Delta-8 should not be considered a controlled substance like Delta-9?
All I know is the hell that my life has been for the past few years in regulated cannabis space by the BCC. I'm a Northern California born and raised cannabis girl, slept under the stars with a shotgun and a dog. Like literally my whole life has been growing this plant as a medicine. So having the state regulate it is, to me, I've seen them mess it up beyond. They contracted Metric, which was a super inefficient system to run it. I don't trust them touching this plant. I believe that we can probably figure it out ourselves. In the ideal abstract vacuum world where regulation actually worked. I mean, the FDA doesn't even regulate plastic water bottles, and there's literally BPA and PET leaching into every time you crack a bottle with water in it, there's PET being released. Like, we don't even have basic regulation on basic consumer goods. So I don't trust these people. They're incompetent. They don't have, we were talking about on an earlier panel, there's the letter of the law, and then there's the spirit of the implementation and the enforcement of the law. And it's a bureaucratic hell that we've seen in California, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. I've seen major extinction events happen with really good legacy operators through the entire Pacific Northwest as they've come online as medical regulated, companies. And it is 90% of people that were in operation a few months before regulation are no longer there. And it's not because they're not good operators. There's major barriers to entry. You have to be well capitalized. There's a lot of things in line. So the more regulation I've seen, I haven't seen it necessarily help with regulation, because for example, or with consumer protection, because for example, with the EVALI crisis that happened in October of 2018, where everyone was getting popcorn lung, the whole reason Jetty Extracts created the vape pen is because we had friends that were going through chemo and we didn't trust the shit that was in the cartridges. So we were like, we want to make something that's clean, and we know that it's not in plastic, it's not all these things that we didn't trust. We didn't like the cutting agents. This was years before the drama. So we spent all this time and energy and money being a good operator, and then there's still the trap market or the traditional market or the underground unregulated market that's coming through with this stuff.
I think everybody up here would agree making a clean and safe product is everybody's end goal. But in a state where the things are more restricted, what's happening is the hemp industry that is just now budding and is just now breaking ground and becoming something. Now we get the Delta-8, and like you said, the popularity is based on getting high more so than the medical benefits right now. So in our states, it's being frowned upon, and it's taken away the ability for us to do business in other hemp-derived cannabinoids and things because of the way it's being perceived.
Ricky,
so
let me just jump in there. What is the general feeling then within the state of Indiana and other places? Like I said, there was a big CBD expo there last week. I spoke with someone there, and she said 30% of the sales that were going on were Delta-8. There's obviously a market for it. Is there any real concern outside of the health side of it?
Well, there's definitely a big market for it. The concern is that one thing we're concerned about the regulations. We don't want the big pharmacies only to be able to take care of it, or the government to tell us what to do, but we kind of have our hands tied, where we would like to see Delta-8 as a stepping stone toward legalization and decriminalization of the entire cannabis industry. Our hands are tied there. So really, I guess I'm looking more for help from you guys to help it more legal in Indiana. And in the state, 70% of Hoosiers are supportive of making cannabis legal. We've got veterans that have PTSD. We've got people with chronic pain, people with depression, epileptic patients, and we get a lot of good things from cannabinoids we can use there. And we want to expand and learn and do more, but without it being regulated at some extent, then they're just going to cut us off from being able to do it at all. So I have to stand up for the regulation side so that I can have a business in Indiana and get Hoosiers that kind of help where we don't have the same laws that great states like Colorado have.
Fair point. Thank you. Russell, you brought up something earlier when we were talking in terms of regulatory stuff about how states should address Delta-8 in terms of the conversion of other non-psychotropic cannabinoids like CBN and CBC and the way they're manufactured. Is Delta-8 sort of becoming this test case now for the rest of the cannabinoid spectrum?
So I think it should be. It's Delta-8. I think we can all agree, and if you look at the whole big picture of it, has helped buoy the entire hemp industry. Farmers have benefited. They can sell their crops, right? Processors, extractors have benefited because where they were stuck with biomass or crude or distillate or hundreds of kilos of CBD isolate that the price plummeted on. It was this giant surplus at the end of 2019. Well, what were they going to do with it? Labs were closing left and right in less than 12 months from opening in 2019 to 2020 or 2020, right? So as soon as people started buying up that CBD isolate and converting it to other cannabinoids, the market started to recover. The whole industry became more robust again. It's buoyed the whole industry up, and everybody from farmers to retailers has benefited from it. I think we all are conflicted with certain amounts of regulation. A lot of governments, a lot of municipalities tend to over-regulate, but I think we can all agree that we would prefer some level of regulation over prohibition.
So, when it comes to regulation, here's what I'll warn everybody of. Name one entity the government regulates that runs efficiently. Case closed.
You know, from our perspective, so we do hardware. I'm with iSpire, and we do hardware specifically for cannabinoids, and we've found a huge market. We initially were focused on CBD and THC, and as we started to go to these shows, starting with HQ event, it's an SSE show in New Orleans in February. Every single person that was coming to us wanted our technology because Delta-8 is a highly viscous oil. It's way thicker. And we have a dual core system that allows for even heating. And it's just better for thicker oils. It's better for terpene preservation and all that stuff. So for us, it's definitely it's not just cannabis touching, but this has revitalized, like I said earlier, like that kind of desperate, oh shit, what are we going to do? And you have to be very nimble in this space, right? The goalposts are constantly moving. Like he said, he opened up his computer to 4 different conflicting things. Every single day we're having, you know, we're business people, but we're not lawyers. We're not government relations folks. We're having to do a lot of, you know, backtracking and cover your ass, you know, kind of a mentality. And it's not really good for business. So, but, you know, for me personally, the reason why I feel comfortable sitting on the pro side, even though I agree completely with the consumer safety, is it's become 80% of our business in the past couple of months, and it's really helped as a startup. It's been a make or break for us. So,
Luna, let me jump in on that. Thank you. Which is a nice natural segue. Thank you to the economic side of this. The economic reality is that Delta-8 has created a mini boom in the hemp industry. Would everybody agree with that? That it's basically saved a lot of companies, it's thrown them a lifeline after years of low prices and failed crops, failed contracts and such. We kind of have this situation where there's the cart before the horse. We have the economics leading a lot of the regulatory situations. Does anybody have any thoughts on that, where it might be going in the next year or so, or where it might end up? Is this all going to end in tears, as the British say?
So, if you don't mind, I've got to be on the anti side. I mean, somebody over here's got to say something negative, so I'm going to try it. I agree with everything you said, and it did help in the hemp industry. Didn't help in the marijuana industry. Right. In fact, it was a big negative in the marijuana industry because now I'm selling against the street vendor. All right. In marijuana, and for those of you who've been part of that business, there was a shakeout. It was a green rush. Everybody was going to make a ton of money, and guess what? The people that didn't have a good business plan, good strategy, good marketing, they did go out of business. I believe that the hemp industry, CBD industry is going to see some of the same. We're not here to save everybody, right? So if you've got a good business plan and so forth, I'm not saying it didn't help, but I would say you have to look at the fact that it also did hurt some businesses out there.
Jessica?
The truth is,
Louder.
Okay, sorry. The truth is that we had access to all of this until 1937. In 1937, we hit prohibition, and governments around the world all went, no. When prohibition lifted in alcohol and spirits, we saw a similar blueprint. And if you follow that blueprint, because I come from a position of expert in the tequila industry, from hectare to the shelf, this maps exactly like that. The question was the schedule and the position. It is my opinion, not that it was asked, if we were to take it off the government schedule and we were to regulate it exactly the same way that we regulate alcohol, none of this would be a conversation.
Anyone else?
One
Go
of the
ahead.
things you talked about is prohibition. We lost 80 years of research because of prohibition. So now that we have an open market and we can start researching these different cannabinoids, we're finding out a lot of information that we didn't know until recently. So to put regulation on it or get government involvement or stop the progress of what we're doing here is going to cripple everybody. What we need to do is figure out a way as a community to respectfully market the product, but also to allow our doctors and scientists to continue researching the cannabinoids and furthering that agenda. Government regulation at this point is going to do nothing but slow down the progress we're making right now. I know every state has their own nuances that they're struggling with. Certain states are a little bit behind the times, but you know, a rising tide is going to raise all ships. And as an industry, to single out a specific cannabinoid right now, you know,
Okay, so Todd, sorry. Do you think then, I mean, we're seeing examples in Washington with like the NCIA with their lobbying is changing congressional thought on cannabis. Do you see that things like Delta-8 with its emergence and like you're saying with its potential is going to end up changing the regulatory landscape?
I'm sorry, say that last part again.
Do you expect that sort of the new mindset, the publicity that's surrounding Delta-8, et cetera, will change the way Congress, the way lawmakers are thinking about Delta-8 and other cannabinoids?
I absolutely think it's going to change the way I think. With the way the industry is marketing the product right now, it's putting a huge stain on the cannabinoid. If people would pay attention to its medicinal benefits and market that in of itself will sell the product. You don't need to market it as a light weed or a different way to get recreationally high. That's going to do nothing but force the DEA, Congress, and whoever else to blackball the product, make it illegal or reschedule it. You know, and it comes down to, you talked about capitalism earlier. I'm a capitalist. I think we all are to a certain degree. But there's smart capitalism. And I think the industry as a whole is shooting themselves in the foot by marketing 250 milligrams or the names that they give it, the flashy images and stuff like that. It's hurting the industry as a whole. And as responsible business people, we need to set the precedents and not do business with people like that.
Who is benefiting right now from Delta-8? Is it the growers, the processors, the retailers?
Everybody.
Elaborate.
Well, I mean, because of Delta-8, look at how many, what you were touching on earlier, how many people started converting different isolates into Delta-8. How many labs are now doing business again? How many farmers are out there having a place to sell their crops? I mean, we saw hundreds of farmers let their crops rot because there is no place to sell it. There were no buyers. I mean, everybody in the business 2 years ago got the phone calls from people, you know, I need 10,000 kilos of isolate a week. No, you don't. But, you know, we all got those calls. Now we have a place to put that product and products to make that are helping people. That's what we need to focus on.
Is the horse out of the barn then? Is Delta-8 here to stay?
The horse is wide out of that barn.
Okay.
Jetty Extracts was selling Delta-8 cartridges 4 years ago that were marijuana derived. So, and we had it twice as much as the THC one. We have it as like a boutique cannabinoid product, and people went, it was like $80 for a half gram, and people bought it up. Back when Guild came out with like the, you know, THCA, CBD, CBG, when these kind of novel cannabinoids came out. So this is, for us in California, this is like not new for us. It's just kind of watching everyone come to the
California,
party.
for God's sake.
But it's kind of like when the party is good and then someone comes and like blows it up, you know, it's like someone blows up the spot. Like that's kind of what Delta-8's doing right now. It's kind of people that are making the block hot. When we all had it, it was like cool, it was simmering. We were doing, like you were saying, when you're operating like on a smaller level where some people were, you know, just like doing little boutique things. But once you start getting flashy and start being like, there's conscious capitalism and then there's greed-based capitalism, and that's what we're seeing is this turn and burn. A lot of what we're seeing also is copyright infringement and illegal use where you've got people copying cookies by making cake, and then they're popping up with these brands they sell, and then they close the brands and move on, so that if there is any litigation or someone's trying to come after them, it's a defunct, old, closed down business. So these fly-by-night businesses, that's why it's so important to go with people that have staying power and long-term relationships, because knowing the difference between people who are coming and are just like newcomers and where did you guys come from, if there's any questions around that, or they only use Instagram and there's only a few hundred followers and it just looks like sketchy business, like that's so important for all of us, is just to make sure that we're not feeding that at all, or asking people for their COAs. Like, are you asking the labs to look for these bleaching clays and things like that? I just learned about that for the first time today. And I've been testing cannabis in legal testing labs since 2015, and I'd never even heard about this. So I think that we need to be asking everyone along the chain. And to answer your other question too, I think the brands are making the most amount of money because they're the ones that can bring up the margins. Everyone's benefiting, but I think the cash flow is happening at the brand level, like the CPG retail.
To continue my analogy, which is weak, is there not a possibility, though, because this has become such a runaway market, that, God forbid we have a worst case scenario where someone is harmed by a Delta-8 product, that this is all going to come crashing to a halt? This is because, it's part of the regulation issue. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of people who are like Jessica said, your brain's not fully developed and you're using this product thinking it's just a cannabinoid from a cannabis plant, but there's solvents and things that weren't properly treated, and then you've got holes eaten in people's brains. And that, that's a problem, and we can't have that happen. That's going to be a bad mark on the entire cannabis industry if that goes unregulated and unchecked.
Okay, I brought this up earlier and you all laughed at me pretty much, but just a thought. Do you think it's possible, first of all, and should it happen, that there is some sort of moratorium called by the cannabis advocacy and industry groups in this country to say we need to pull back on this, we need to examine it more, and we're asking people to voluntarily withdraw it until there's more testing done? Is that at all realistic? Russell.
I would love to say this industry does a fantastic job of self-regulating, but I'd be lying.
Of what?
Of self-regulating.
Yeah.
But I would be lying. The reality is, if you have a market position with a product and you're there and you decide to pull your products until you have some sort of regulation, something that you feel more comfortable with, there's 1,000 companies willing to step right up and take your place that might not have the same ethics that you have.
All right.
I think it's highly unlikely.
Louder.
I think it's highly unlikely that it's going to come off the market entirely. There's going to be some backlash if there's harm done, where all of us are going to suffer from additional regulation and some additional pains from that. But ultimately, I think Delta-8 could be one of the things that leads to the breakdown of the prohibition entirely. Because the more the THC products get in the hands of people, the tougher it is to say you can't have it, and we're gonna restrict it from you. Yeah. So the consumer is going to say, why are you keeping this from us? So there's likely to be a short-term backlash of a government overreach, which happens all the time, to try to punish an industry that's not behaving well, not behaving the way they want us to. But ultimately, in a longer-term game and more of an infinite game, is that it's going to lead to a breakdown of this prohibition.
That's a very interesting point that we're kind of getting. It's the weight of it all is going to come crushing down in forced legalization. Jessica?
I also think that we are discounting the possibility that the government stepping in would classify it under cannabis. It's kind of black and white. And I believe that our government isn't stupid. For God's sakes, Canada and Mexico are legal. So why wouldn't you be? But I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how is it classified, and the question of where does it sit in the industry. And I think if government's getting involved and it's being considered, I firmly believe it's just simply going to move over to the cannabis regulatory side.
Ricky?
I'd say this about the government being involved. The temperature of our country right now, there's a lot of talk from politicians about bringing the country together. And maybe this is the industry that they need to focus on for that, because I think you could get a Democrat and a Republican to sit down and enjoy some form of cannabis product together. So maybe that's where we need to be directed. Maybe we need to make it a little more political, but from our end to theirs instead of from them to us.
If we could all just sit around with a doobie.
We'd be all right.
Okay. I presume you all have questions. Let me just get one. I want bold predictions. Let's go through the room here. Where do you expect Delta-8 to be in the next 5 years? Let's start here, Harry. 5 years. Start with Harry.
Certainly hope it's legal like all the other cannabinoids and hopefully a lot of the other drugs too.
Next.
Yeah, I mean, isn't Chuck Schumer talking about all, like, yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if in the next 2 to 3 years it's not federally decriminalized. That's what I'm banking on and putting all my visualization energy into manifesting.
And that's cannabis in general.
Cannabis in general, which will make this all a moot point, and we'll be laughing at this discussion hopefully in a
Would
matter
you
of
expect
months.
there to be more research then on the individual cannabinoids being allowed by the government?
Absolutely, because with the I don't know if you guys know why we're in such a weird feedback loop, but like something that's Schedule 1 is Schedule 1 because there's no proven clinical medical efficacy, and you cannot test for clinical proven medical efficacy on a Schedule 1 substance. How about that? So once we remove one contingency, I think that all of it will flow from there.
Russell?
So I think anybody that says that they can see past 6 months in this industry is delusional. That being said, I don't think Delta-8 is going to ever completely go away, but it will look drastically different even 3 or 4 months from now than it does now.
I can barely think ahead to next week. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to answer it a little bit more broader than that. Whereas cannabis can be in 5 years from now, I think in this presidency, you're going to see marijuana, cannabis, in all of its forms decriminalized. And I think the pathway to that is when prohibition ended with alcohol and the formation of liquor stores. I think cannabis is going to end up similarly situated to where you're going to have, go get a liquor license or a cannabis license and open up your own cannabis dispensary. I think that's going to happen, or at least the legwork or the pavement or the pathway to that is going to happen in the next 4 years.
Thank you.
Have you guys seen that? I think I just read somewhere that they said that one of these states is going to start pulling them behind the counters of like drugs or like alcohol stores. Some of the D8 and some of these psychoactive compounds that you're going to have to get carded because they already have that implementation verification system going. So there are already talks. I read a news article about it. So it's definitely the way to go. Because it's less work that they have to do. They're like, you guys are already carding everyone. Just card for that.
Okay.
And then capitalism will take over.
12 years ago, I sat in on a meeting. It was a tequila meeting with Southern Wine and Spirits and Brown-Forman. They were writing the documentation to lobby for exclusive distribution nationally for all cannabis products. 2 weeks ago, Southern Wine and Spirits announced that they had the exclusive distribution rights for Canopy. Canopy is one of the biggest cannabis companies in the world. My answer is 5 years from now, it will be under distribution. It will be a tiered system, the same way that the TABC works. We will have to register it the same way tobacco works. Philip Morris, Southern Wine and Spirits, and all of the major players will be, excuse my French, ass deep in it, and we will be highly regulated through that system.
Jessica, do you expect the corporations, the big ag, to Bigfoot all this, or will there be room for the small
We
people?
already have Nestle, Levi's. I mean, the conglomerates that are jumping in, funding us, it's mind-blowing. Big money is here. It's in Google, it's in Facebook. They're all just setting up.
Is it going to be like artisanal beer, though? Will there be room for the small
No, it's
person?
going to be like spirits. So
Really?
some states are 5 tiers, some states are 3 tiers. What that means is I have an importer's license. Then that importer's license goes to a distributor. That distributor has a permit to go to the sales. Sales has a permit to go to shelf. That's called premise. It is absolutely controlled. And I believe that we will be descheduled as a drug, but we will be monitored by the blueprint of the spirits industry.
All right. Joe?
So within 5 years, I think it's going to be removed and moved over to the dispensary side, or like you're saying, some other avenue where it's age restricted, but more than likely sold to anyone who is of the proper age that would like to use it for whatever purpose. And it's going to have to compete with Delta-9 on its own merits from that point.
Right. Ricky?
I think 5 years from now, Delta-8 will be more of a minor cannabinoid than it is right now. But I also think that 5 years from now, we should be developing between now and then tests that help determine which cannabinoids are needed most in individual people. So that's another industry, finding the ways to figure out which cannabinoids are going to work best for each people. And hopefully 5 years from now, we'll have some stuff like that and we can really make a difference in people's lives.
Carl?
How do I add to any of that? I mean, I agree with everything that's there. What I would say is I think it'll be a controlled substance. And I'm not a big Jägermeister fan, but you walk in the liquor store and if that's what you like, you can buy it. And I think Delta-8 will be one of those things that you can buy as long as it's controlled.
Okay, I think it's time for some questions. As you come up, just let us know if you're directing your question to a particular person on the panel or the panel itself. Sir?
So I won't have to direct it to the panel because one of the things is being a synthetic chemist, there's not one Delta-8. You keep talking about Delta-8. There's 4 enantiomers. So flumitamide comes to mind. That was a drug that made the flipper babies in the early and late 50s.
Can you speak up a little bit on that?
You have 4 different things. So I use the analogy, when you take CBD and you have a chair, you have 4 people walking around the chair. When the music stops, that's the enantiomer it makes. We don't have any evidence on what the other 3 enantiomers do. We have evidence on what happens when the plant goes from CBGA to Delta-9 synthase down to a Delta-9 THCA, and then that particular enantiomer that the plant makes now makes that particular enantiomer of Delta-8. Go back and look at flumitamide. That's why the FDA, as Carl and I know, have enantiomeric excess that every drug has to go through. What do the other 3 enantiomers make? And what are you making when you go from a CBD to that compound? And that's the part that makes it even more difficult. It's not going to be measured by Carl's HPLC, but I'm assuming, I don't know if you're doing GCMS to be able to find these 4 enantiomers, but out of 4,000 samples that have been run on Delta-8, only 2 have been 1 enantiomer.
Do you have a question in terms of that as
So
well?
how do you take that into account of everything you're talking about? Pro or negative?
You bring up a great point. One of the biggest challenges in manufacturing Delta-8 from the get-go is what are you really making? And who's testing it, how it's tested, the methods that's used. I mean, we've sent samples to hundreds of labs for testing. And we pull as homogeneous samples as we can. And the results that we get are so drastically different, depending on not only the lab, but the testing method, of course. Even when they say they're using the same testing method, it is the bane of a Delta-8 manufacturer's existence to try and find out what you're actually making. So due diligence is what I generally tell people. Do the best that you can with what you have available to you.
Go ahead, Joe.
I would say that in a consumer environment, it's not going to make much difference if they don't understand it. So if they don't know what they're looking for and they don't demand it, then it's not even going to show up on a label. It's not going to show up anywhere. So we're talking, even this discussion to begin with is over the head of most consumers. So the only way it ends up being an issue is if somebody picks up the product, they get a specific effect and they want to duplicate that, and then become a demand for it. And otherwise, it's just too much inside baseball for most people.
Let me follow up on that. I feel like this is kind of a closed society in here. We're talking about cannabinoids. Like you were saying before, most people hardly know the difference between marijuana and hemp. Is there a need for a larger scale public education regarding cannabinoids?
So I'll feed into that, and I'm going to feed off of something Luna said. There's this closed loop. If it's a Schedule I drug, you can't do research on it. You can maybe get an exception, and do work. But what John's talking about is very difficult research. Not a lot of people can do it. And we've got to get to the point where we deschedule this down to a point where those scientists can look at this. Alanine, right? We've all heard of alanine, right? It's necessary for our bodies. There are two types, positive and negative. Only one of them does anything for you. The other one does nothing for you. It's the exact same molecule. It's a mirror image of itself. We found that out by doing years and years of research, very intense research. That, I think, is what's got to happen. And if we can get behind that, then we'll figure out we got to remove 3 of these isomers because they could be harmful. These 2 are really good if they're put together. That's a little ways off, but I think that's where we've got to go.
Another question? Yes, sir. Go to the mic.
So I own 2 dispensaries in Georgia, so we don't have any recreational option. We're a quote, quote, medicinal state, but it's only 5% low THC oil that you can't purchase. So you can get your card, but you can't purchase it. Sorry, I'm too tall. So we do see the medicinal side. It gives us an outlet, for people that need THC products. So we definitely see the medicinal side of it, and it's amazing. But looking at the states that have made it illegal, has anybody challenged the federal interstate part of the hemp bill, of the farm bill, in saying, right now I ship it all over the country. The mailman can drive it through this state that it's illegal. Has anybody challenged that yet?
To the best of my knowledge, that has not been. Idaho just became the 50th and final state to legalize hemp in a limited way. And they were the big test case before because you had several large shipments coming from Oregon here to Colorado that were being seized. As far as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the interstate issue has been pretty much solved. They're basically forcing or prompting, suggesting strongly that cannabis and hemp businesses have very detailed documents, certificates of authorization, and lawyers on standby in case their shipments are at all stopped.
There
and you
actually
still
are
don't have
some
a guarantee
cases-
that you're not going to get messed
sorry.
with. Just want to say that, like, there's the spirit of the law, like we talked about, and then there's the word of the law and the spirit. You can have everything in line, like he just said, and they can still mess with you. They can still confiscate it. They can still destroy it. They're kind of renegades depending on what department you're working with. There's so many different organizations that can intersect with it. So even if you're good and clean, if someone just wants to pick a bone or that's a poor county and they want to get some asset forfeiture out of it, you could have a problem.
Yeah, and I was going to say that in Indiana, we actually, when it all first became legal and everything, after a while of selling the products, Indiana went and banned the biomass or the hemp flower, and it was that Intercommerce Act that helped us decriminalize that.
You're actually in a state that is being much more open in terms of its laws regarding Delta-8. Are you hearing anything from your end?
We've got task force in certain counties that are showing up, but just to a lot of y'all's point, they're taking product off the shelf and they're testing it, and you're getting varied results all over the place. And I was, when we first started down the Delta-8 path, I was buying distillate and doing those things, and I finally just stepped away from it. And I said, there's too much fluctuation, there's too much variance. I'll let somebody else manufacture my products, put the liability on them. But in a direct sale to consumer from my online store, how are the states writing the legislation? Can they come back direct to me in Georgia for selling to them in another state where I don't know the regulations? And, I've got legal opinions from my attorneys that say it's fine, but I just didn't know if there's been any case study of any of that.
Jess?
The truth is, every state has its regulations about importation and exportation. As a matter of fact, states have laws and regulations about online sales, what you can and cannot purchase from your state. Louisiana is a great example of that. Most online retailers aren't aware that they are trafficking, and that when that consumer gets that one parcel, the government is actually watching. And the way it works is the federal government, FDA, they sit around for about 6 months and they gather it all up. And then they do it, if you watch the last 5 or 6 years, they do a complete sweep. Add to that the PACT Act. And if you don't know what the PACT Act is, go research the PACT Act. The PACT Act says that you cannot ship vape products. And I come back to vape products because we vape CBD too, and it's applicable. In order to cripple the vape industry, the PACT Act was enacted and fortified so that no moving part of any vape cartridge whatsoever, all the way down to the battery or its plug-in system, can go in United States Postal Service. 24 hours ago, I got a phone call from the United States Postal Service for the first time in 6 years. They wanted to open a package and inspect it. We know that eyes are on us and they are watching everything. And we believe, from my perspective, that there's going to be a great action of some sort, and it's going to come down hard.
Yeah, and according to my attorney, though, just 3 days ago, I believe, the post office only had until April 30th to write their regulations on the PACT Act, and they didn't write any regulations. So we went back to selling vapes online. And
Your
Same.
your
We just did the
resource for
same
that
thing.
is Brady Bell. You want to go back to Brady Bell and the USPS. He is the one that got us our shipping rights with the United States Postal Service. He sued them for our rights to ship hemp.
very
We
good.
just
Thank
got
you.
some kind of a notice that said from our controller that said that they actually took a laissez-faire approach because they didn't have the bandwidth or what they believe their authority. Some of the big shippers reneged kind of on their willingness to actually implement some of these things. So now they're not requiring an adult signature. They're not requiring the EIN, and they're also not requiring, what's the other thing, Adam, that they took off? There was another thing that they're not doing now. The signature, the EIN, or a business license or a reseller's permit. So at first, and this is also, there's the PMTA that regulates the e-juice side, and then there's the cannabis side. So we actually, as a cannabis manufacturer, and like she said, they're regulating down to even the coils within the cartridges and the batteries, which means cartridges, disposables, and batteries by themselves, including the USB chargers, are all considered.
And it's being driven by Philip Morris because they want to shut us all down.
100%. So if you guys notice, recently, all of maybe about a year and a half ago, there was pictures of empty shelves of where cigarettes used to be, and it was all e-juice vapes. And Big Tobacco got really scared, and so they started lobbying hard and under the cause of it's going to the children, save the children. And so they're throwing out the baby. This goes back to the baby with the bathwater.
Any other questions? All right, tell you what, before we go, thank you all very much. Give them a round of applause. All right. If you don't mind, just so we can keep social distancing, if you want to give out your information, your emails, etc., let's go through the table once. Dr. Craig, do you want to give out some information?
How do we reach you?
I know,
Sorry.
in case somebody wants to talk to you. You don't have to.
All I can say is thank you guys for being part of this. I think this is an amazing time watch because a lot's going to change. It's going to be very cool.
I'd also like to thank everybody for coming out and thank everybody for being on the panel. If anybody has any interest in talking to me, I got cards or time right after.
Next.
You can reach me by looking up botanicwellness.com.au, or if you'd like to come by the booth, I'd happy to exchange some information with you.
I am Jessica Arendt, also known as the Hemp Enchantress. I'm all over social media. I'm all over this floor, and I am on this circuit until the end of the year.
Right.
Todd Underwood. Todd at Evolution CBD, or if you want my cell phone number, I'll gladly give it to you. Come on by.
Russell Lombard, CannaRedux.com or ForgeHemp.com. If you want to talk, happy to answer any questions or help out. I've got plenty of cards. I'll stick around.
He's a smart dude. Also, shout out to John McKay, who's here, the godfather of extraction, who just did an amazing keynote with Harry this morning. Russ was saying that guy knows too much, and it's like your brilliance is excellent. I have cards. I'm Luna Stour. You can get me at luna@getispire.com, lunastour.com. Come by our booth with iSpire. We're at booth 33. Really grateful that you guys are all here, and I do believe that this is going to be descheduled soon, and you guys are all here making history. So you should be very excited and proud of yourselves.
All right.
I've been told if you use the Google and type in Harry Resin, you'll find me.
All right. All right. Thank you all. We are adjourned. Have a lovely rest of your day.